Let's have some fun. Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Shane, and normally we would be listening to some great music and having fun. However, today is going to be something a little different. If you've been listening to my videos, you know that I'm going through the Beatles' entire catalog, all of their core albums, song by song, start to finish. And I just finished the first album, Please Please Me. It's taken me, 12, 13 weeks? 14 weeks. 14 weeks to complete, but I'm finally done. It's over on my Patreon. I thought I would record a little synopsis of the album, a little recap, and my thoughts about it. I am an avid Beatles fan. I've just loved the Beatles. They're probably my favorite group, even though I was born, kind of a little late for that to happen. I don't know. I'm still my favorite group. In any event, I tend to prefer the later era Beatles, the mid to late era Beatles. And so a lot of the early stuff, I may have heard it, but I haven't heard it a lot and haven't really given it too much attention. So for me, listening to the songs from their core albums in order is giving me a chance to really dive a little deeper into some stuff I wasn't aware about, especially in these earlier albums, but also kind of see the progression of what the Beatles have done over the course of their career. And so that gives you a little bit of background on me. The first album, Please Please Me, has some songs that I'm sure everybody's heard. Well, let's face it, not everybody has heard them, but a lot of people have heard them. Very popular songs. But it also has some songs that are more obscure, just because they're from the earlier album maybe, and they're not ones that are played on the radio too often, that kind of thing. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background on the album itself, and then give you my thoughts on it now that I've listened to it over the course of the last 14 weeks. So Please Please Me was the first album by the Beatles that was produced. It was released in 1963, March of 1963. And really the reason it came about is because the Beatles had success with their first two singles. They had Love Me Do, which reached number 17 in the UK. And then they also had Please Please Me, the title track for the album, that reached number 1 on a couple of charts as well. Because of the success of Please Please Me, the label at the time, Parlophone, I believe it was, they wanted to take advantage, and they basically said, we want an album. We want to take advantage of the success of the single, Please Please Me. We want an album. What can you do? So at the time, George Martin, who was their producer, he basically came to the Beatles and said, hey, I need 10 more tracks from you guys, because they already had the two singles and the B-sides of those singles, which was Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You was one of the singles and its B-side, and Please Please Me and Ask Me Why were the other two songs. And so George Martin comes to the Beatles and is like, listen, I need 10 more songs. Can we get 10 more songs together so we can make an album? And at that time, this is a little interesting tidbit of trivia. At that time, in the UK, the standard album had 14 songs. 7 on the side 1, 7 on side 2. Now in the US, most albums had 5 or 6 songs per side, so only 10 or 12 songs. But in the UK, 14 was the standard. And so that's why they were looking for 7 songs side A, 7 songs side B. So when George Martin came and said, can you guys come up with 10 more songs? Write 10 more songs, or do whatever you can do to get 10 more songs for this album? The Beatles' idea at the time was, hey, we are already performing at the Cavern Club at the time. We can just do our set, basically. We can just do the set that we're doing whenever we're performing anyway. And so that's what they did. At first, George Martin had the idea of actually recording the live performances in the Cavern Club, but he soon realized that the audio just wasn't going to work out that well if he did it. So he scrapped that idea. What's really amazing is that the Beatles produced this album in one day. They came into the studio at 10 a.m. on a Monday, and 13 hours later at 10:45 p.m. that night, the entire album was done. Now, I think George Martin may have had to come back and do a little cleanup on a couple songs, but for the most part, the album was completed in that one day. So that's one little interesting piece of information. What the other piece of information that was interesting to me as I listened to this was, you have to remember, this was in the early days of the Beatles. When they were, that day that they were making this album, Ringo Starr was not their set drummer yet. So Pete Best, who had been the drummer, they had to let him go. And they hadn't really finalized another drummer yet. Ringo was basically invited to come play on this during this day. And separately, George Martin had been asking around for a drummer. And so there was another drummer that came also that day. I think his last name is White. But basically he came in, and so there are a couple songs on this album that the album version does not have Ringo drumming, but has this other guy who was brought in to drum. And so that was interesting to me, that, this was in the very early days, so they didn't have the drummer finalized yet. The other thing that's interesting about their earlier albums is the number of covers that they have. So each of their first two albums had 6 cover songs. So you only get 8 original Beatles songs and 6 cover versions. Again, a lot of that's to do with the fact that they were basically playing their set list from when they were performing at the clubs. And just like any up-and-coming band, some of it's performing cover songs that people are familiar with to get people to listen to what you're playing. You sprinkle in some of your originals in there, and you can kind of build a following that way. And so that's what the Beatles were doing. They were performing cover songs mixed in with their own stuff that they had written. And so when they made that first album and needed to come up with 14 songs, 6 of those songs are going to be cover songs. If you go back and watch my reaction videos to each individual songs I play on the cover songs, I play the original versions that these cover songs that the Beatles played were based on. So you can kind of hear what the Beatles had as a foundation to start with, and then hear their version of what they did with it afterwards. So I think that's pretty interesting. If you have access to go back and check that out, check that out. So anyway, so that kind of gives you a little bit of background. Again, was all put together in one day. Very crazy. In fact, Twist and Shout was intentionally placed last on the album because George Martin knew that was going to shred John Lennon's voice, basically. So he intentionally put it at the end because he didn't want John Lennon's voice to be shredded early in the day. He figured put it at the end, that way, his voice can be toast after that, and that's fine. So Twist and Shout is the song where they really only did one take on it. The first take is what you get on the album because, again, John Lennon himself said he wasn't really happy with his vocal performance on that song. He felt he could have done better, but it was the end of the day and his voice was just so worn out. And then that song took a lot out of him as well. They tried to do a second take, I believe, but he just couldn't do it. So they kept the first take. And so the version you hear is the first take that they did for Twist and Shout. Anyway, just some interesting tidbits. Now, in terms of the album itself, again, my overall take on it, I loved hearing the early Beatles, again, because it was obvious that they hadn't really, they don't get me wrong, they'd written their own songs. 8 of these songs are their originals, and there are some big hits in there, but there was very little experimentation going on at this point. This was their first album. It was pretty straightforward stuff. A lot of just what we would call today your standard pop music, and your standard pop music themes. not a lot going on with depth to it. There are a couple songs on there that have a little bit more depth to them. Maybe like There's a Place. But other than that, very few of those early songs had any depth. They were pretty straightforward, you know. But regardless of that, you had some huge hits. I Saw Her Standing There, which is a song that is pretty well known now. You have Please Please Me, of course, which was a huge hit. Love Me Do, a huge hit. P.S. I Love You. And of course, Twist and Shout. Even though Twist and Shout wasn't an original of theirs, still, their version is pretty well known out there. And so, for me as a Beatles fan, going back and listening to music I'm not as familiar with, it was great to hear this stuff, to really have to listen and pay attention to it and not kind of gloss over it. And I found some appreciation for even some of their deeper tracks. Some of the stuff that isn't as well played or well known, and some of the stuff that isn't even their original stuff. So, I mean, in terms of their originals, of course I like their hits. I like Do You Want to Know a Secret? That was really good to me. And in some of the covers, stuff like A Taste of Honey, really cool to hear that. And I kind of really like that version. And so there is a lot to be said for the album and a lot of cool stuff on there. I appreciated hearing the early stuff just to see the origins and where they came from. This was, again, a pretty straightforward pop album, but at the time, it really resonated with people, and was something unique for the time period that it came out. The other highlight that I will mention that was really something else at the time was the album was at the top of the LP chart for 30 weeks, which at that time was huge. So really cool stuff. Okay, so sorry I had to let my dog out, and that's why I've shifted a little bit perhaps. But in summary, really great album to listen to. Some of these songs will probably be a little bit higher on my playlist now that I've heard them and can appreciate them more, especially hearing them in the order that they were released, and hearing them with fresh ears and giving them a little bit more attention than what I have in the past. That's where I think I will leave things. I spoke for a little bit on the album's history, spoke for a little bit on what I thought of it. I know this is a completely different type of video than I normally put out here on YouTube. There wasn't any music to listen to on it, mostly because the Beatles are very strict in terms of blocking any audio or video that you put out there. I know there are channels that can get some of the Beatles audio and video out there, but it is very difficult to do, let me tell you. And so if you want to see these videos, my individual reactions to the songs on Please Please Me, you do have to go over and become a patron at a certain level in order to access those. But I wanted to give my summary, and since there aren't any videos or audio in this, there's no issues with anything putting this up on YouTube, and so I'm putting this up not only on my Patreon but also on YouTube so that you can also get my reaction to the album as a whole. I think this video can stand on its own, even though it doesn't have any audio from any of the Beatles songs in it. These are just my comments about the album and a little bit of history for those who may not have been aware. I like to pick out little interesting tidbits and trivia that I was able to find out. And so that's what I've tried to do here. If you like this kind of content, click the like button and let me know that down in the comments. Let me know what you think about this type of video. I might do more videos like this. If it's not Beatles music, I might try to actually pull in portions of audio from different songs, because I have some ideas of some videos to do that aren't just pure song reactions. but are more of a little bit more analysis or a little bit more in depth than just my first reactions upon hearing a new song. I will be continuing to do those too, but I wanted to put this out there for the YouTube crowd out there, just in case any of you are curious. And in the future, I'll be doing one of these for every album as I finish it from the Beatles, so you can look forward to those. Even if you're not a patron, that's completely fine. I appreciate you just supporting me over here too by watching as I listen to music for the first time. But in this case, I thought it'd be a good time to share my love of the Beatles and these albums as I finish them, my reaction and some trivia from them. So, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a great evening.